and we're just about ready to begin. This is Jonathan Curtis, Ground Zero Financial Services, the latest targeted attacks from the Darknet. Round of applause for Jonathan Curtis and our
Thank you. Thank you very much. Just a little bit of background. Started my career at Bell Canada. I did ISP, safety and security there for 13 years. Then went to Nominum, a DNS vendor here in the Valley. And then I worked 4 years in federal law enforcement at the CRTC, enforcing the new Canada's anti-spam law, malware, et cetera, as director of intelligence there. And rounded it out here, and now I'm back in the private sector working for NORS. So just, I have one vendor slide, and I do apologize for it. So I'm going to probably skip through it quickly. So NORS has a massive sensor network, roughly 8 million odd sensors. That's how we collect our data. We also collect net flow data. We operate as 16 different cutout companies around the world. We're global in nature. That's about as much I'm going to say there. So let's think about the history of sort of finance and what was and what is today, back a few years back. And before I get too far into it, I know some of you have just been through a statistical, you're all stats experts now. I do have one pie chart, and I do have one bar chart. But the numbers are accurately represented, so I checked a few things to make sure the audit trail's clean. The consumer wallet really was bombarded with attacks, phishing attacks, massive onslaughts of attacks. And this is really early days where IP blocking was really simple. But really, it was the consumer on their own, kind of fending for themselves, a garden hose and a grass fire kind of thing. The good news is OpenDNS, Fish Tank, APWG, and a number of grassroots initiatives, some of which MOG, which I've been involved with, had really kind of pushed the miscreants a little bit by protecting consumers. ISPs, I'd hate to miss out on that, social networks, et cetera, have all invested massively, not just in money, but in people, time, energy, to really help drive the industry around trying to protect the consumer. So we have had a bit of a shift around pure play phishing based on these some of these efforts over the last few years. This is not my chart. It's from APWG, but I figured it was relevant in terms of just seeing the shift in the trends, and really sort of showing, you know, through the last 3-4 years, it's kind of dipped and then it's back up, but it's overall down a little bit. But it's still it's good news. There's still persistent attacks in the space, obviously. But the miscreants are moving, and they're moving in our sense. And what we're seeing in our networks is more targeted, more specific, moving from the consumer wallet to sort of the bank vault. So, you know, trying to compromise banking infrastructure, and that's a lot of what my talk is going to be today. So, to complicate matters a little bit. Content distribution networks, Tor, I2P, and other hosting infrastructure make it difficult, not only for law enforcement, but cyber analysts to get to the root cause of the problem. And if you thought that was complicated, it gets a little bit more complicated when you start entering into the space of some of the zero-day and et cetera. I think you're all experts in this space, or at least not, you know, hobbyist at worst maybe, and you get this. You've seen this, these types of slides and this type of problem getting more complicated, maybe less volume, but much more complicated. And to top it off, we're seeing the state actors get involved, Russia, Syrian Electronic Army, China, Iran, and so where you're seeing hacker by day, state sponsored by night, or reverse that, we're seeing those trends in our data. And what we're also seeing is, just to paint the landscape a little more, is sort of an inside out where you've got the attack surface growing. You've got some insiders, whether it's state-sponsored activities that turn political. What I mean by that is really you'll get a statement by, say, Barack Obama targeting, say, Iran or North Korea, and then the onslaught will hit UK banks. It'll hit US banks because they want to hit where they can do financial harm. And this, by the way, this presentation is meant to be interactive. We're going to get into darknets in a few moments. But what we're also seeing is the ability to not only just do a DDoS attack, but while the DDoS attack is happening and the resources to combat that are taken over, there's a tsunami that comes in and wipes out other tracks, if you will, by busying out resources or by having secondary waves of attacks that take place during peak periods or on weekends. This is really not much different than spammers back in the early mid-2000s, where they would attack on the weekends because they knew sysadmins were away. So the result really is keep calm, your data is gone, right? But is it gone? Did it go over to maybe Tor? Right? In the case of Sony, their data, I believe, is still up on Tor, 113 terabytes of compressed data. Or did it go to one of the more recent threats, or although this protocol was, I believe, invented in 2002, starting to rear its head a little bit in the sense that Tor is being maybe less trusted by the miscreants. So, trying to keep track of, say, where your data is gone, once it is gone, is a little bit difficult. So who here has done investigations involving darknets? Okay. And in terms of level of difficulty, there aren't the usual signs that maybe point you in places. There aren't the usual, it isn't this easy searchable network or hosts on networks, whereas an open source investigation, it gives you there's a lot more of a trail in play. And so I guess what I'd like to get into is some of the statistics that we've seen. I've got I'll give you an overview of what we're seeing in the banking industry, then I'll get into a few case studies. It's meant to be somewhat interactive, and then I'll walk you through some proactive steps. I don't have time today to do all of the proactive steps that you could take, but I'm going to do a deep dive on honeypots at the end. It went over well at DCC where I spoke a few months ago, and I hope that we have the same type of reaction here. So what we're seeing across the three countries is really an increase and I want to be precise here based on your previous schooling that you had in the last session. You're seeing an increase proportionately of banking infrastructure in each of these countries increasingly coming onto our list. So their corporate networks, their partner networks, et cetera, are hitting our sensors. Which is really the smoke to the fire, okay? So we're seeing an increase in that space, and I'm going to get into more specifics exactly what that means, but, and this is in the first quarter, and the different colors in the graph represent the increase, the different colors represent each month, and if you do add these up, they will come up to 100. So I was kind of happy about that. And so here's my pie chart, which also has percentages that add up to 100. I think I get extra points for that. The interesting thing here is really that the banks, when they're getting into our data, when they're hitting our sensors, the increase is really around botnets And then there's little decreases against the other smaller categories that we have here. These are more tenacious categories, by the way. A botnet-infected bank employee is pretty common practice, whereas when you get a proxy that's sitting there, and this is, by the way, behind their corporate firewall. This is data we're seeing coming from IP addresses that are owned by banks, okay? So in terms of all events, what we've seen for Q1 this year is really a large percentage of them are bots, and no real surprise there. But really, when you compare it against the banks, there's about a 5% increase there. So there is some targeting in terms of botnets against banks as common play, because proxies and other types of malware that come out of a bank are much more noticeable. I mean, you're talking about a corporate infrastructure where there's firewalls and whatnot that will catch a lot of the miscreant play ahead of schedule. Where we see the biggest exposure for banks are some of the banks that have done acquisitions. So they're acquiring, they're making changes. Whenever you make changes, you tend to make some mistakes, and that's where we're seeing a bit of an uptick in certain areas, certain geographic areas. Particularly, there was some stuff that happened in South Africa earlier last year, and then again late in the year. So to get into specifics, what we're also seeing is when a CVE, when a vulnerability is announced, the time it takes to go from a vulnerability to being an exploit. In this case here, we saw the proof of concept in mid-February. The CVE was published on the 17th of February, and then we saw this IP address here hitting not our sensor, but actually our customer. So we're seeing it live in the network, the exploit take place. Now that's 4, give it 6 weeks, what have you. Call it 5 just to saw it off, but that's really not as juicy of a story as the next one I'll give you. But and by the way, if you're rushing to write down any of these IPs, you can hit me up and I'll send you some IPs of interest for you, including the ones that are here. So sorry, those are the logs. So really, what we're seeing also pick up is the velocity. So whether it's the capabilities within the hacker community, miscreant community, state-sponsored community, although I'd argue that's not quite a community, it's more of a entity. What we're seeing is the time from the announcement of the exploit to proof of concept code is shortening, and it's shortening rapidly. In this next example, we've got an SQL injection, and within 2 hours of it being announced, we saw in a live customer network and in our sensor network attacks from this particular IP here, based in the Netherlands. And so the speed of these types of attacks is of concern. The ability, the tool set that is available to the criminal entities and the state-sponsored entities is astonishing. So this week, to get into the third case study, is really the Microsoft IaaS exploit. You've probably maybe heard that's been released. We believe we'll start seeing some attacks in that space in the short term. Yep. Sorry? Is this just a denial of service exploit, or there's something that on this particular one? Yep. Thanks. Because I didn't have the answer to that. No, just be honest with you. Yeah. Great. Okay. So what's that forcing? Some of the things that are happening really, this isn't new when it comes to criminal, right? Back in the early 30s with Bonnie and Clyde, they had access to banks, they had access to highways, right? And they had access to really crappy laws. The FBI got involved in 1934 when bank robbery and kidnapping became a federal offense. And I'm not saying the laws need to change particularly to fix this problem. We're having a lot of international cooperation, particularly between the FBI and other countries, to try and bring these actors down. What I'm saying is that within the industry, it makes it difficult to communicate at the high speed of rate at the high speed that the transactions are happening. So you get an exploit, and a minute later you're seeing it being attacked. It's pretty hard to share the data at that wire speed. Now, courteous of, say, some of the FSI-SACs, some of the REN-SACs, Facebook announced its threat share. There's certainly a movement, and I apologize if there's others that are out there that have started sharing data at that sort of more closer to Ethernet speed, maybe. But that's certainly we have to adapt to try to curb this problem. And so I'd like to talk to you, before I jump into the honeypots, are there any questions regarding, any other questions on the data? God, I was expecting somebody to nail me on the pie charts or something, but anyways, okay. So honeypots. I want to talk a little bit about my experience with honeypots and what I've used to try to improve consumer safety, internet safety, etc. in the space. The most recent one that I built was back in October. I launched one with the CRTC. It was 1,500 phone numbers spread across Canada. We had every major carrier donate 100 numbers, which in reality isn't a lot of numbers. There's available 390 million phone numbers in Canada, and we had 1,500. Albeit you divide the 390 in half, let's just say it's 100 million available phone numbers. What we saw was the first day we turned it on, within hours, we had telemarketer / scammer calling the honeypot. So it doesn't take a lot of honey tokens, let's say, a lot of honeypots, a lot of infrastructure to garnish real-time intelligence on your attacker. So with that, we actually had 2 live cases that the honeypot, because we have the ability to do better investigations based on the data that comes back from the honeypot. You can tell volume, if an attacker's just sequentially dialing through the numbers, for example, et cetera. The takeaway there would be, you probably wouldn't hurt to have a few honeypot numbers for your own organization. It's not that expensive, especially if you're on VoIP. And then monitor that to see who's trying to call your employees and maybe do bad things to your people. So the other types of honeypots that we've run would be, say, domain, IP type honeypots, Bogon, RC 1918. If you're running a corporate network, you definitely should be running a Bogon honeypot or RC 1918 to see if anyone's trying to communicate out there. You'll catch a lot of early warning, a lot of early staged attacks. And the next thing you can do is start looking at, and I believe that OpenDNS bought BGPmon a few weeks ago. So BGP monitoring, certainly a good idea. You don't know who's trying to hijack your IP space. It's not so much a honeypot, but it's sitting there data that's just waiting for you to mine it, right? You can get in there, you can see whether or not you're under attack for hijacking like that. If you have NetFlow, it's very valuable. I suggest that you look at some of the stuff that William Saluski wrote. Actually, I think William Saluski's got some stuff, but he's got stuff on replacement for Wireshark. Moloch, I believe it's called, and you can run packet sniffers and NetFlow data and try and munge that together and get a sense of your vulnerabilities in that space. So then you can get a sense of also historically, without a lot of data, certainly it's going to take some data, but It's summary data, and it'll give you good insights around a sampling rate of what's happened on your network. And it really puts you in the control channel. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the control channel or not, but really in, say, DNS or IP routing, BGP, those are really control protocols, if you think of them that way. They control where you're going to go, right? And so I believe that, just in summary of this slide here, I believe that the intelligence is a lot closer to you than you think. There's things that are in your network today you could turn on, low cost, do it in a lab first. Don't just go off and start, don't just run off and build out things on a production network. Take and run this stuff in a lab and, really flow through it with some methodology. As I mentioned, there's other things you can look at as well. Honey tokens, user IDs. You can look at building out, say, fake DMZs, use hardware that's about to be decommissioned. You could put that in place so that you can garnish, some of that intelligence around, lighting up a network that you can see people knocking on your VPN. If you don't have vpn.yourdomain.com today, create it and see what happens. See who starts knocking on the door, right? One other thing that tends to skip past one item I think that it needs a little bit of attention that I actually personally haven't put as much as I'd like to, would be, say, exit interviews. I'd like to think about how we could use some kind of token or something with people that leave a company, because there's a lot of damage that can be done just before they leave and after they leave. So it's really key, I think, for the insider threat to have something in place. I don't know what that is yet. Does anyone have any thoughts around what you could do in an employee that's about to leave and maybe push your data off to, say, a proxy or a Tor or an anonymous FTP site or something like that? Does anybody have any thoughts around that? You have like USB policies or, no? Barry? Yeah. I can lock out the CEO through OAuth. Nice. That's cool. Yeah, the other thing too is I noticed I'm not going to say which company I was working for, but there was a high-ranking official that had their Outlook PST file on a network share, which I thought was kind of a little bit crazy. For employees, if they were going to take something, that would certainly be pretty juicy. So I've skipped pretty quickly through the presentation, to be frank with you, but some of the asks I would like to kind of go through. I was hoping to hear more from the crowd on some of it, but that's okay. Is really, I think that there's a need, first and foremost, to do some sharing. You need to share information where you can in forums or closed groups that you can share data in. Trusted groups, I guess, is probably a better word, that you can share data on. Where you can automate, you should try and do some automation. Some of the things I mentioned around creating honeypots in certain places, like a VPN, et cetera, you should try to build maybe and then move it around and reposition those honeypots if you can. You should publish. We published all the work that we did on the voice honeypot. We published through MOG, so there's a best practice that I wrote with a few folks, Alex Bobatek from AT&T, and a few folks from Georgia Tech on running voice honeypots. So there's a lot there for you. You should think about consuming data, whether it's over an API, RESTful API, or some sort of machine readable, some way to share it. I think Facebook's put some thought around this. Certainly, the ISACs through Stix and Taxi, et cetera, are looking at it. It's really going to save, and why you do it is, you're going to try and save some time. You're going to try and save some money. You're going to move faster. You're going to scale. You probably can scale at wire speed at that point. and then you'd be able to react faster as well. And I'm probably maybe yep.
You talked about the time between CVs being released and when you actually see them being implemented. You talked about the decreasing time primarily. Is that just because when you talk about an SQL type exploit of that class, that it's more well known, people are probably going to be able to learn about it and identify how to implement that kind of attack versus something that's a little more detailed, requires a little more expertise, and would take more time to properly deploy?
Yeah, I think it comes down to a few things. One would be the amount of information that's made available to the miscreant. So, how much detail is in the exploit and triggering that. Another would be the tradecraft, as you mentioned. Do they have working knowledge of the protocol? Can they quickly get some copy paste code and start doing something with it? There's, I guess, a number of factors. I think money is probably the biggest motivator, or harm, economic harm, depending on, if you have enough resources, you can shorten that window down by having enough resources in the space. And of course, then they're also running these protocols already natively in their own labs, right? So they can, the capabilities are there.
Another question I had was with regards to, you suggested sharing data, and I know that the FBI has tried to encourage that among its industries, and there's, especially post-node, and people are not, InfraGard is supposed to be that front-facing element that meets all that takes in information from these different sectors, but the complaint from those folks are, well, the FBI doesn't give that, it doesn't share it, and so now they're trying again, although they're trying to get the industries to talk amongst themselves. Do you see that happening more within the industries, or is there still that holding back because they don't want to be able to say, yeah, my pants are down,
right?
We got spanked.
Yeah, so I probably am positioned fairly well to answer that question because I came from federal law enforcement, and now I'm back in the industry, and I've been back and forth between the two. And so I'm going to take it apart in two places here. So within the industry, I certainly participate and work with a number of industry experts in sharing data. I believe that's working at probably 80-90% right now. It's quite quick. It's actually worked fairly well from 99 or 97 or whenever NSPSec came along. That seemed to work fairly well. It's tricky, though, as I mentioned, that with the threats moving as quickly as they are, the actual protocols to share the data with. If it's over email, it's a little harder because not everybody reads email, they filter it, whatever, right? It needs to be, I think, more machine to machine type sharing. So in the industry, I believe that I would say in my 20-year history of watching this, it's a solid 80% when I compare it to governments. It's better when you cross the international border. There just seems to be a little more collaboration that happens, a little more willingness. Maybe it's people that just want to travel. I don't know. But, and that was a dirty shot on it, I know it, but, yep. Sure. So, I would say that at a high level, I'm going to skip back up because I may have gone through it a little quickly. So I talked speed, okay, so in terms of their infrastructure becoming, I apologize, I'll pull this over here so I can see you. Their infrastructure becoming more compromised as a darknet. So if their infrastructure is it's showing up on our sensor network and it's growing as, say, botnet, for example, and disproportionately to all other events that we see. Let's talk about botnet for a second. To us, it's a key indicator towards the fact that if they're showing up hitting our sensors, which our sensors aren't trying to extract or exfil data from their network. We've just put these sensors out there, and they're hitting those sensors. That's where there's smoke. We believe there's a fair amount of fire. So meaning that And not to try and be a fearmonger, because that's not my goal. My goal here is really to try and give you facts, understanding, and discussion. But I think that with that, with botnets and say proxies, and I'll just go back a little bit more. Here we go. So the good news, though, the good news. So there's good and bad here. The good news is that it is botnet, but as you know, botnets can be used for a variety of purposes. The other thing is that it really is more of a sort of the proxies and whatnot is half of what the norms are. So, I attribute that through to the fact that I believe that I mentioned earlier that the corporate networks are better protected, better hidden. So the other thing that we're seeing, and I meant the 2 0 days that I talked about, those actually happened on FIs. Those were real live cases. One's in the UK, one's here in America. I'm not going to get into the names of the companies, but I'm also doing other stuff in insurance companies, which blends into FIs, and seeing that as they grow and as they move, as I mentioned, that growth really opens them up for attack because the defenses are down. And so when I look at it, insurance companies particularly aren't as tied in to, say, some of the FIs, or not as closely in there, maybe less regulated. I'm not sure the reason, but we're seeing a higher uptick. And I'm sorry, I don't have the slides and the graphs to do it, but I've done the analysis myself on the insurance companies, and it's alarming. I wouldn't say it's scary, but it is alarming that even it would be interesting to see banking and financial and then see insurance beside that. I believe that they're less positioned. Yeah.
Talking about malware infections going out and beacon into CEC systems that we monitor, correct?
Yeah, so it's 2 things, 2 or 3 things. So we see the net. We have core infrastructure routers in Russia and other countries like China, et cetera. We see net flow data that shows that beaconing happening, yes. We also see them connecting to us, to our infrastructure in country, trying to either making those connections, I guess, to whether it's a full handshake connection or just a ping out. So we're seeing it not only just on your traditional, let's say, botnet, but we're also seeing VoIP. The unprotected area within the corporation, I would say a few of them would be web services, VoIP. Email is fairly fortified at this point. It's fairly guarded, although it's still a major channel for, I don't want to underestimate how much email means. I'm an old email hack myself. But, those are kind of the key threats, really. A couple of the key threats we're seeing. Because they're just kind of left, right? They go off, they do some splashy new website, and they leave they don't go back and patch it or something to that effect, right? Like, look at this IIS vulnerability. We believe that will be a target, because a lot of banks use IIS in some of their infrastructure. Most of the banks, though, will be, any of the more serious banks, they'll actually have Akamai out there giving them 1 layer of protection. And then they'll have, multi-factor authentication, et cetera. What I was saying earlier is the miscreants are more likely to target the IT administrator of the bank and not so much the customers of the bank. That was the point I was trying to make with the vault and stuff like that. Yep. Yeah. Yeah. I was going to do a breakout for, Dridex, I believe it's called, the latest one. But the lines start to get really blurry, to be honest with you. I mean, the names change so quickly. But just to answer your question, I probably could get you a much more detailed slide, and will do so if that's okay. But I will take that away as a takeaway. Yeah.
Sorry, maybe my lack of understanding. Can you give a couple of examples of these categories? What do you mean by proxy? What do you mean by web malware? What do you mean by
Sure.
I'm a network guy, so
Yeah, that's okay.
why
Yeah.
does it matter why?
Yeah. So botnet would be sort of your generic, like SQL injection, botnet command and control systems, your traditional, I guess, botnet traffic, whether it's, say, DDoS traffic or could be, these are just a bunch of examples. We saw it connect to a command and control system, for example, for, say, a Zeus bot, or for, say, I threw Dridex in there, but it would be in this category here. When I talk about server attempts, we are operating 6,000 different applications in our sensor network. So we will see attempts against our servers, whether it's an SQL injection right. So if I see you connecting to command and control system, that's more or less, you're going to be more likely to be a bot. If I see you connect to one of my servers and make an attempt to try to hack it, whether it's SSH, whether it's Telnet, whether it's remote desktop or something to that effect, then it's server attempts. Proxies, we're seeing them either try to facilitate, say, a reverse proxy, or we're seeing them try to do some form of proxying. Proxying being you can make a connection and kind of passively get through into the network, right? And then also allowing that traffic. We may have seen it come out as a Tor exit node as well. We may see that IP address try and operate as a Tor exit node. Okay, we're operating 5,000 Tor nodes and emulating 20,000 Tor users, so we see that type of traffic. Web malware, this is drive-by malware. This could be, this could be their website. So some banks, you think, oh wow, that's just one domain, right? If you take a look at, say, domain tools and look up a handful of banks, you're going to see that a lot of them have on average over 1,000 domains associated to themselves, right? So what I'm saying here is that some of those domains get compromised and they end up hosting malware off the bank's site. Does that help? Okay, so I did want to take the time to apologize for having to go through the slides again like that. So thank you to OpenDNS. If we could get a round of applause for OpenDNS. And the other sponsors, we're a vendor maybe next year, or actually one of the later ons, I think in Ottawa, where I'm from, we'll try and sponsor. Also would like to thank the volunteers, and I would like to thank you, the participants. Thank you very much.